I'm JJ Perez with Inside Runner Sports. That's Greg Lucas, San Antonio Express News, coming to you from two undisclosed locations in New Orleans, Louisiana, far from Bourbon Street, I think.
Too far,
Uh,
JJ, too far.
yeah, following UTSA's 29-16 loss to Tulane in the season finale, Greg, I think this one boils down to two things: lack of offensive production that was caused by five Roadrunner turnovers tonight.
Yeah, I think the turnovers are the big thing you look at right away. And, we can get into this part of it more later. I think it would have been interesting to see how the game played out without the turnovers because it felt like Tulane was still winning the line of scrimmage in a lot of cases and might have had the upper
Yeah,
hand in this regardless. But when the turnovers come into play, you don't even get to find out how it would have gone. It just completely swings the entire tone of the game. And I think we can just go through them really. The first one, Frank Harris threw the slant pattern to Cephas. The cornerback was there to break it up, and it bounced to the safety. It's just kind of unlucky on a deflection, but it's not like that play was supposed to connect. It would have been an incomplete pass anyway at best. And it's just kind of a result of a team that is capable of covering your guys, And then his
yeah,
other interception, it felt like it's really hard to tell, even watching the replays, to what extent he kind of got hit on the shoulder. And I think it messed up the throw a little bit, but it's a pretty easy, theoretically, a pretty easy dump off pass to the tight end it looks like a crossing route there. And he just kind of sailed it. And it went to the defender who was in position to make a play on it. And so I think that that's one that I don't know, maybe you just chalk it up to some of the pressure that Tulane was able to get up front, and maybe it's just a bad throw by Frank Harris. It's really hard to say for sure. And then you could look at the third one was the interception from Oscar on the
yeah.
fake punt.
Fake punt.
I don't hate the fake punt there. You're kind of in a situation where you want to try to find a spark before halftime. You're in a good position on the field to try it. I think it was like a 4th and 5. Maybe there's an argument to just leave the offense out there if you want to get aggressive,
Yeah,
but that's kind of a pretty long chunk to try to gain on a 4th down situation. So it's you don't want to just say, oh, well, it didn't work, so it was a bad call. It's one of those things where if it worked, it looks brilliant. So they must have felt pretty confident in the call and the look they got, but it's weird because obviously the way it worked out, there was 3 guys there who could have intercepted that pass, it looked like. So that one, I guess you just chalk up to sort of a one-off. And then the 2 fumbles were, Kavorian Barnes, the fumble that he had, it was very reminiscent of the ones that we saw against Texas State and against Army, where a guy just catches him from the side where he's not looking. And that was, 10 weeks ago. Those issues hadn't popped up since then. But in this case, the ball protection wasn't where it needed to be for a defender that he couldn't see and couldn't react to. And the one that Robert Henry fumbled towards the end of the game, I thought that was just, I guess it was probably still the third quarter, but I was just an incredible play by Tulane's defender. I thought to really do like the perfect kind of strip ball, punch it out kind
yeah.
of technique there that forced that one. Because I don't think we've known Robert Henry to be a guy who had a fumble problem either. So just sort of a bad time for all those things to come together at once. And I don't know, aside from maybe if you want to talk about the line of scrimmage portion of it, I mean, both of the running plays happened pretty far downfield. They were after pretty significant gains. So I don't know if there's any trend you could point to or any single reason you could say why the turnovers became an issue today, but obviously that was the deciding factor in the game.
Yeah, to me, the two fumbles in the second half were probably the most critical ones because it did seem like UTSA was going to try and at least attempt to mount a comeback in that second half. Greg, I mean, the defense played pretty good after halftime. I think there was 4 straight possessions where Tulane had punts, and it looked like if UTSA could get anything going in that second half, the game may have had a different outcome.
Yeah, I mean, for what we've seen from UTSA this season or in recent seasons under Jeff Traylor, this season significantly lacked drama, and it felt
Yeah,
like we were finally going to get that kind of a game here, where just when you think you can write your story and you've got the other team counted out or you've got UTSA counted out, they used to always flip it on you, and it felt like, especially right when Robert Henry was down to the 8-yard line, I think was where he fumbled. It felt like he was going to go in, and then you were going to look up, and it was going to be a one-score game, and it was the way the defense had been holding Tulane. It was like everything would have been fresh again, but it was not to be in this case. And I think there's really not a whole lot more to say about it other than just the turnovers. I guess the offense overall wasn't that productive. It felt like the run game was really struggling, but when you look up at the end of the game, they had decent numbers, especially for how
yeah.
good Tulane's run defense has been. I know they hit a couple big plays that might have skewed it a little bit. Frank Harris's passing game was not the most efficient. And so it did feel like the run was more there for them than the pass, which is not what you would have expected. But I don't know. I do think just the turnovers more than anything were the issue. And if you eliminate that, the offense was moving the ball well enough probably to be able to make something happen.
Yeah, to your point though, I do feel like there was a little bit more pressure on Frank today, and I mean, that was a good Tulane defensive line. I do think, despite UTSA being able to get into some run lanes and have some production there, I do feel like, I mean, without going back and watching the TV copy, that Tulane may have won the line of scrimmage with their defensive line, I think.
And I think you can look at the other side of the ball, and it was a similar story. Tulane ended
Yeah.
up running 227 yards on 41 carries. That's a 5.5 average, and they broke a 58-yarder in there. So that
Yeah.
average is inflated, but still, I thought that they generally did a pretty good job against the defensive front of UTSA, which is considered one of the strengths of this team too. So yeah, it did seem like Tulane had an advantage in the trenches. I think that's a big thing for UTSA to look at and think about going forward. And maybe it is part of when you're going from Conference USA to the American Athletic Conference. Obviously, league wide, the AAC was not that strong this year, and UTSA had a lot of games where they ran away from people. But when you think about the top teams in the league, your Memphis and your SMU and your Tulane, who UTSA only played one of them, and it was today. That's where this stuff kind of starts to show up. They have that recruiting pedigree that brings in the type of athletes in those positions that allows them to sort of set the tone for games and win battles in the trenches that UTSA, maybe they're not ready to win those yet against these quality teams, or maybe it was just kind of an off day. I mean, we have been without Mekhi Hart on this offensive line for so long that we forget that that's something that UTSA is still dealing with, and that the shuffle that created, and that some of these guys are either out of position or still in their first year in their roles. And so I think there's maybe a little bit of a room to give them a bit of a cushion and to not be as hard on that group. But I do think certainly they were not the superior unit today.
Yeah, for sure. Tulane is, I guess, arguably been the best team in this conference from start to finish. They were the consensus, media poll pick in the preseason, and I mean, they've looked good. They've squeaked by several of their games the last few weeks, but I mentioned this to someone else. You don't apologize for winning. They've gotten it done, and they certainly look like, the best team in the league today.
Well, and somebody told me this on the way out of the stadium, actually. If you just look at those games individually, a lot of them sort of played out similar to UTSA's win against North Texas, where at the end of the game it was an 8-point margin, but they felt pretty comfortable at different stages of that. And then it was sort of a neat comeback that they just sort of had to outlast. And I think somebody said, Tulane's only trailed in the second half for, not that long, I guess, throughout this whole conference season. And that makes sense when you win every game, but it was not like they had to make a lot of comebacks or that they were in peril too often. It was just that they were within range of something going wrong and potentially costing them the game if they had maybe an opportune turnover or the opponent sprung a big play or something. But I think maybe it's one of the marks of a championship team that they could, I don't want to say coast through those games, right? That sounds like probably a lot easier than it actually played out, but that they were able to just do what they had to do to win and get to this point where it was going to be the real showdown game against UTSA that everybody had circled since the start of the season, and then deliver in that one too. And if there's any doubt about whether they're the best team in the league, it's because SMU and them haven't played yet. So we'll find out next week.
Yep. Yep. The Tulane will host the AAC championship game next Saturday in New Orleans. The Roadrunners are all but eliminated. There's a slim chance they could get in there if SMU loses, but the rankings don't
Maybe wins by
indicate.
100. Yeah.
Yeah, it's UTSA's season is over, except for the bowl game coming up here. Greg, the Roadrunners start 7-0 in AAC play in their first time. A disappointing end to AAC play, but pretty exciting stretch there where they really gave it a big run at it. If you would have told me this team that went 1-3 would be in this position, I don't know that I would have believed that at the end of September.
I don't believe you because we basically said that. So I know you're trying to give them credit and pump them up a little bit, but I think this was what was interesting is aside from that non-conference season, I think the year largely played how it was projected from the start. Even the
Right.
top three teams here at the end of the top three teams everybody had in the preseason. And just as an aside, it'll be interesting next year. I plan to make this a storyline, but Jeff Traylor essentially told us as this win streak was getting rolling that, yeah, we used the non-conference season to get ready for the conference to see who our guys are going to be, to get some young guys some experience. And so sometimes the results aren't as strong as they could be otherwise. And it's not like you're out there trying to lose the games, but you don't put the same amount of emphasis or the same type of approach to it. And when you see how close the season was to coming down to that performance in non-conference games and the way that has in the computer rankings, I think there's probably room to be more critical of that approach and to reevaluate whether UTSA can proceed that way going forward. You don't know how many years it's going to come down to a tiebreaker situation that you wish you would have gone all out in the non-conference and kind of padded your computer resume a little bit. But that's just sort of an aside. I think we did have a little bit of doubt when the conference move was announced a couple years ago about how UTSA would fit in the new league. And then once you kind of see the schedule out in front of you and you don't play SMU and you don't play Memphis, it ended up being probably a pretty similar schedule to, in terms of the strength of the schedule, to what we've seen the last couple of years in Conference USA. So it's probably not that surprising that they could win 7 games in a row the way they did. It would have been surprising that they won them by the margins that they did, where I was sort of trying to pump the brakes on this UTSA team the last couple of years at times, just because understanding and them admitting even how simply it would have been possible for one or two plays to go different. And then this team doesn't have the kind of undefeated record or the undefeated run that they had. And you can't highlight a couple plays this season the same way as you can in past years and say, wow, this team easily could have a couple extra losses. There's just no, I mean, maybe if you nitpick North Texas somewhere, there's a way you could flip a play or two and it changes the result. But generally, they were significantly better than all these teams. So that's why I think coming into this week, there was a real argument that this was the best UTSA team that Traylor has had here, and it might still be close. I know this result's going to be pretty disappointing. We'll see how they shake out in the bowl game, but in terms of some of these advanced metrics that the league's looking at, or like S&P Plus that ESPN does, they were within a couple places of their best teams in the last couple of years, and they'd even jumped Tulane this week, and that's why I think there was a pretty reasonable argument that UTSA could have pulled this one off. But I really thought it was kind of a toss-up coming into the game, and I don't know if I'd feel that way if they were to line up and play it again in a couple of days. I think Tulane looked better just because of what they were able to do in the trenches, but I do think that that gap maybe isn't huge, and UTSA should be, I don't want to say proud, but I think they lived up to what should be expected of a program in the first year in a new league.
Yeah, the one area I think I'll push back on some of that is I feel like the bye week after Tennessee and before the Temple game fell at a really good spot for the Roadrunners. And I don't know if you roll out Frank Harris against Tennessee, if he's healthy enough to go against Temple, and if they win that game. And then if they don't win that game, certainly this, I mean, run that they went on may have been different. Who knows?
Yeah.
The way Frank Harris has played the last month of these last 4 games has been phenomenal. And today, as an aside, he didn't play great, and that was kind of what led to the loss, I feel like.
And I think it was also important that in some of these later games in the season, they were able to get their guys out. I thought that was going to be a really big factor in this game, that Tulane's guys had played every snap for a few weeks in a row, and UTSA had rested the fourth quarter 2 weeks in a row. And not only that, but UTSA played Friday last week, so they had kind of a normal prep week, while Tulane was the one on a short week. After a Friday game and a Saturday game and a Saturday road game at FAU, albeit early in the day, so they probably got back at a reasonable hour. But I did that stuff did not end up being a factor at all. Tulane looked completely fresh and ready to go for this one, and I don't think they made a ton of critical mistakes. I don't know that I usually watch the game more from UTSA's perspective than the opponent's perspective, but I don't recall anything that Tulane's probably going to feel like they made some critical misstep or are going to want to have back. And so I think that they played a clean enough game that when UTSA makes some of those mistakes with the turnovers, then that's the result that you see. But your point was about the conference season and how valuable it was to have the early bye week. And so, yeah, I think that the fact that didn't come into play later in the year in terms of the wear and tear, because they were able to build some of these margins, was huge. I kind of predicted in my head that they're going to say the bye week is great for them in week 4, and then in week 11 it's going to be like, this bye week came at the wrong time and we needed our guys now and all that. And so, because we've seen that the last couple of years where I think they had bye week, and then towards the end of the season you could see it wearing on them. But they were, I actually thought, really healthy today for the most part, right? We do our little check before the game and say who's out there and who's not out there, and there was not a lot to highlight. It seemed like they had all the guys that they've had, and that's, again, I don't want to overstate their health, because it is important to remember that JT Clark's been out the whole season and Mekhi Hart's been out most of the season, and even a guy like Cyrus Dumas, who seems like he would have been a particularly impactful player on defense, has not played much this year. And so they are without 3 guys who they thought would be cornerstones of this team, but still, what we saw in conference, the level of dominance that they had at times there, all those guys were available for this game today. So they managed the whole schedule early bye week situation about as well as they could have. And we saw Frank get healthier and healthier. We saw him, I think, really look to run again today, or at least that option was on the table. He actually led the team in rushing attempts, and I know that counts sacks and stuff too, so it's a little bit little bit of a skewed number there, but I thought that they went to that more and more as the season went on, and it was an effective element of the offense at times.
7-1 in AAC play and 8-4 overall. Coach Traylor said after the game that it was a disappointed locker room, that they were champions and they just didn't prove it today. I think Rashad Wisdom had the best perspective, kind of taking a step back and looking at his time here at UTSA, where the Roadrunners were just excited to get bowl eligible, and now they're disappointed to not be going to a third straight championship game.
Yeah, it's impressive that he was able to have that perspective right after the game. Granted, he made us wait a half an hour to talk to him, so maybe that helped a little bit. I'm just kidding, but yeah, I thought that was really, really mature, the approach that he had
Right.
there, and because people, Jeff Traylor talked about this with the fan base. Even people can reset their level and change their expectations instantly. Where you have one good season, and now if you don't do that every year, you're in trouble. Or people are going to say they're going to get upset. And I think that for the players and someone who's at that age and that involved in it, to not succumb to the same thing, to be able to say, hey, this is still a really strong season, and kind of sets this program up for the future. I think it's great because it puts them in a position where now, if they win the bowl game, they can say, we came into the year with 2 goals. It was to win a conference championship and to win our first bowl game, and we at least hit this one. It sends them off on a high note. And if they lose that too, it's still going to be the same thing we've seen in the last couple of years where they lost the bowl games, where it was, yeah, this game that is kind of an exhibition didn't go our way, but we've set a foundation here that the next generation can carry forward, and it'll be a fine send off for those guys either way, unless something horrifically embarrassing happening in that game,
Right.
But so I think they've kind of put themselves in a situation, and deservedly so, where however this final game of the year plays out, they've established a pretty strong, successful, positive narrative that they can carry forward.
Yep, 8 wins is. I think in the preseason I had the Roadrunners at 7 wins, so I think it's more than a good season. It would just fall short of a great season.
Yeah, I think a lot of people wanted that 9-3 or that 10-2, or I mean, you got to remember, some people even thought it would be like they only lose to Tennessee and then they play in the New Year's Six, and at the time that was pretty reasonable. Like before the season started, Frank Harris for Heisman was kind of crazy, but also felt feasible just because of how well he had played the year before and how strong the team had been. So that went out the window in week 1, and then I think by the end of the Army game, it was this New Year's Six thing's probably not happening. But then from that point on, if you start the season there, they played about as well as they could. And we don't need to go rehash that. You can watch the old videos if you want. But there was a lot of reasons that those games didn't go their way, or that they felt like they kind of got caught off guard, or whatever the case may be. And it turned out to not be indicative of who they are. And I think they can come away from this game feeling like maybe this was not a truly indicative performance when you have that many turnovers, that's not something that they struggled with all season, where it's, you'll see teams where they have this weakness, and then in the biggest game, it shows up in a huge way and it turns the game. I don't think it was the case like that. This was not a team that struggled with turnovers all year. If they did, it was the other way around, where we were talking early in the defense couldn't get them. And then that changed. I think they had one basically every conference game, if not every conference game. And so, yeah, just kind of an uncharacteristic performance with a couple of little plays that didn't go their way. And again, like I said at the top, I don't know if they eliminate those if they win this game, but certainly we would have been able to find out. And now it's kind of still an unknown.
Yeah. Yep. A handful of plays may have changed this one, but I think that's what happens when you face like a real top 25 team, and a team like Tulane. I mean, you don't, the margin of error is too small, and you don't get too many of those opportunities to correct those mistakes. Greg, what's next for the Roadrunners? I guess in the interim, what happens at Texas A&M? It sounds like we may see a resolution on that soon, very soon, and then I guess the bowl game.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if we'll see a resolution on Texas A&M soon. I guess it depends on your definition of soon. I don't have a lot of insiders within the A&M program, but it seems like that could go on at least another week. So we'll see how, to the extent that kind of lingers. And then tomorrow is a day you might see some job openings. We're still sort of waiting to see what the situation is in Houston and with Baylor, and to what extent that becomes a conversation around UTSA's program and Jeff Traylor's status. And that's a whole conversation we've kind of had before with regards to A&M, and can unpack another day if we need to. But I think it's still going to be some pretty interesting times. And then in terms of the bowl destination, if they have any pull at all, I can only imagine they would want to end it. And by end it, I mean the final run for Frank Harris and Rashad Wisdom and the rest of the seniors with a destination kind of trip. So whether that means Boston or Hawaii, if those are within the realm of possibility, I have to imagine that's the direction they would want to go rather than something more local or less exciting. But again, that's just a guess. So
Yeah.
have to see how it plays out. Do you have any insight? I haven't really like looked. I haven't even watched the projections that much. I just sort of knew, however, this week and next week played out that those were going to change a lot. So it felt like a waste of time. But if you've been tracking them, I don't know. Feel free to share any insight.
The Fenway Bowl, there's a ton. This conference has a ton of tie-ins, but a lot of them are secondary. I don't know if you could clarify that a little bit. There's a like a primary tie-in, and then kind of like if there's not enough from other conferences, they just kind of put you wherever.
Yeah, I don't know when exactly the bowl system seemed to get less specific. I
Yeah,
think it was around the time that ESPN ended up taking control of a lot of them, and maybe it's always been that way, and I was just kind of ignorant to it. But it seems like there's more flexibility than ever because ESPN will create whatever matchups or whatever regionality or whatever they
yeah,
think will generate the
yep.
best level of interest and fans, ticket sales, and traveling and excitement while satisfying what those teams want and creating good matchups and all the different things you have to balance within that. But it seems like rather than all of these bowls individually acting in their own interest to that end, now there's this overseer that's able to sort of align things in a way that makes sense, but it also creates more flexibility and more possibilities for people like us to try to unpack. So I guess it's just sort of a wait and see, and even the results tomorrow and through the weekend and next weekend will probably play into that a lot in terms of who is the most appealing pick and where do they want to slot them in against who and all the things you have to avoid, whether it's like, potential rematches or anything that could come into play in that sense, I think. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out.
That'll be next Sunday sometime, not this coming Sunday, but the following at UTSA. They'll announce that. So, Greg, anything else you want to hit before we take a break? This will be the last one, not a no media, I don't think, this week, and we'll wait and see what happens with the job openings and what trailer rumor pops up next, and wait for the bowl destination, I guess, right?
It's so weird, isn't it? Like, when it hit me was when we were at the radio show and Andy Everett said no show next week. And I was
Yeah,
like, wait, why not? Oh, the season's over. It
yep,
really kind of crept up on me. I think it felt like these last 6 weeks were all set up to get to this moment. And so I don't know how the team framed it, but for me, it was like this was just the date that was kind of circled on the calendar. And then it didn't even occur to me that after that, it might be essentially done because we were all just kind of building here. And I don't think anybody on UTSA missed out on the finality of senior day. I think they soaked that in pretty well. But for me, as just a media member, I don't know how the fans are feeling. It really caught me off guard that now the year's over, but they're going to give us plenty to talk about with the coaching rumors and stuff. And then obviously once bowl season gets ramped up, we'll have plenty to talk about, both kind of looking back, which I think will be fun with it. You
yep.
can never get talking about this group and their legacy and what they've accomplished. And also looking ahead, I think the expectations for next
Lots of
year,
young guys, lots of young guys.
provided we can get, so the portal window opens December 4th, December 3rd, one of
Right.
those.
Yeah, yeah,
If we can get a resolution to the coaching thing by then, and we can just
yeah.
have those kind of conversations, that'll be a lot of fun. If the rumor mill is still hanging over everything, that'll be less fun, but I think it'll be an interesting time either way.
Yep, you got there'll also be a recruiting class somewhere in there in the early signing period. So,
Oh, of course, yeah.
uh,
You got
yeah.
anything on
So,
that?
wait and see. It's all up in the air at this point. So,
It
we'll
was
find out soon.
it seemed pretty, I think you had asked a question at some point and that it indicated that it was pretty quiet.
Yep, yep. They actually lost a few guys in the last month or so. So, they got some work to do there.
Do you
And
think
I
the
mean,
rumor impact that?
no, I think it was just a function of other guys poaching, Power Fives poaching the things that Power Fives do. So they got a little bit of work to do. But I also do think the transfer portal has changed the way things work. It's like you lose a high school guy, it's not too big of a deal. You're gonna find a replacement in the portal. So um they're
Yeah,
gonna be active. They've been great in the portal.
that's true. I could go both ways on that. I do think there's something to be said for getting a guy in young, developing him, getting him into your culture and your system. even if you get a young portal guy, it still kind of feels like a mercenary. And I'm sure every player is different, but there's something to like, it feels like they're there for themselves, like
Yeah,
that you were their
yeah,
second choice, their fallback option. They weren't really that into you initially, and now you guys are just trying to make it work. You know what I mean? And
right, right.
it's not totally accurate. They've obviously had so much success with transfers that it can't be a problematic way to go about things. But I still think there's something to be said for that high school recruiting. And especially as more people think that way, the ability to find those diamonds in the rough because people are not going as deep on their scouting because they have this
Yeah,
other option. I think that
right.
opens that avenue up more than
Yep.
maybe.
I do think we'll see. I think the calendar goes dead next week sometime, and then it heats back up. So I do think we'll see some official visits and some things happening here, provided that everything stays intact with the coaching staff. Who knows what happens, and not just with Jeff Traylor, but with the rest of the staff. So that's something we'll keep an eye on moving forward, and
Yeah, good point.
just see what happens between now and the bowl game, Greg.
Hell yeah, dude. Thanks for doing this video. I appreciate you letting me
Awesome.
come all year.
How's your rate your overall experience in New Orleans? I am in and out in under 15 hours. I'm going to be total in the city of New Orleans.
So here's the thing is I was in New Orleans over the summer for a friend's bachelor party. So I had the whole New Orleans experience there. And I did significantly overpack in case I wanted to go out one or both nights. And those things have just stayed in my suitcase. I got here yesterday. I was pretty tired. I had to write another story. And then now tonight, but tonight I should have known, unless there was some crazy UTSA victory celebration I was going to try to tag along with. This was probably never happening given the early flight and the amount of time it takes me to wrap up my work for the day. So very quiet trip to New Orleans, but I hope everybody else who was here and maybe hadn't been here recently had a great time. It can be a fun city,
Yeah,
but maybe not
yeah,
for me this time around.
yep. Hopefully, the Roadrunner fans who made the trip, there were a lot of them.
There
That
were a
they,
lot of them.
yeah, that they have a good time here in New Orleans. So, well, Greg, that'll wrap it up. Another exciting season in the books. We'll be back for all the postseason action. Appreciate you watching. JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports. That's Greg Lucas, San Antonio Express News. Thanks for watching, everyone.